Well, welcome. It's 6:38 a.m., October 13th, 2022. My name is Cedric Marin. I'm an immigration lawyer at Holt Immigration Law. Thank you so much for joining us. And today, we're going to take your questions live. So ask me your questions about Express Entry, about immigrating to Canada, and we're going to do our best to answer them. We're also going to provide an update about what's been happening in the last few weeks. Last few days. So since the Tuesday live Q&A, there's been a lot that has happened in immigration law. So I say we get right to it. Please let me know where you're joining me from. Please start asking the questions inside the chat. We're going to start answering the questions live in about 5-10 minutes. And before that, I'm just going to provide a quick overview of what's been happening in immigration law. Donc, pour ceux et ceux qui se joignent à nous, bonjour. Mon nom est Cédric Marin. Les jeudis, j'essaie de faire une partie du live en français aussi. Donc, si vous voulez immigrer au Canada et vous voulez discuter avec un avocat francophone, je vous encourage à m'écrire. So I do try to do a little bit more French on Thursdays. Nevertheless, a lot's been happening in immigration law in the last few days. So let's get right to it. So first and foremost, we have the new round of invitations. So yesterday on October 12th, 2022, there was 4,250 individuals that were selected and the score was 500. So this is fantastic news. So what we're seeing here is a trend that every 2 weeks, we're taking an extra 500 individuals or so, almost. Before it was 250, but right now, over the last few draws, we're seeing about 500 individuals per draw. And even before COVID, we're seeing around the same numbers, right? So about 3,600, 3,200. So we're in the same range as when we're looking at they were still in COVID here. We're at the same range here of pre-COVID. In fact, they're taking more individuals than before COVID right now. The score is still high. So before COVID, right, we're seeing about the 450s, 460s, 470s. The score right now is about 500. So it's still, well, not about, but the score is 500 for the last draw. So the score is still quite high, right? To get 500 points, you're probably somewhere around 29 years old. You probably have a master's degree. You might have Canadian work experience. You might have foreign work experience, right? If you're married, they also assess your spouse for some points, but in most cases, it's going to mean that you're going to lose a few points. So there we go. So very good news. Congratulations to those who received their ITA. And I think very briefly, I just want to talk about the most common reasons why an express entry application was rejected. So we actually asked our lawyers at the firm here, what is the most common mistake for express entry? So head on over to Resource blog and take a look here at our blog entry for the most common mistakes. But listen, let's just go over what I'm seeing in terms of applicants being rejected, right? So number one, it's going to be proof of work experience. Right? So it's very specific. And if we take a look here at the completeness check, if you received an ITA recently, I strongly encourage you to review this in detail, every single line here, because this is the most common reason incomplete applications are the most common reason why your application for express entry could be rejected, right? So the number one reason would be proof of work experience. We're talking here about wrong knock, right? We're talking about insufficient documents. I think I passed it actually. Oops, education. There we go. So take a look here for the proof of work experience, what they want, specifically what they want inside of these letters. Very, very specific. And if you have tax documents, job offers, pay slips, it's not mandatory, but it definitely helps demonstrating your knock and demonstrating that you actually did the main duties and lead statement. So number one reason here, right? Let's talk also about police certificates. So here for police certificates, it talks about specific requirements, right? So regarding if you've lived in a country for 6 months or more, these police certificates are required up front, right? But when we're talking about police certificates for express entry, there's specific documents that they want. And that's not necessarily mentioned in the completeness check. But if we go here on the IRCC webpage and we look at the specific country, so let's take the Philippines as an example, and we click find out, this is what they want. They want the National Bureau Investigation Multi-Purpose Clearance Certificate. So make sure you check to see exactly what police certificate they're looking for. And then, depending on your case, right? So in some cases, if you have one of these statements on your criminal record, well, they want additional information. So take a look at again, very common reason for why it gets rejected. Take a look at how to get a police certificate, right? Make sure you have the proper police certificate. And also, very important, make sure that you, the completeness check page, where did it go? In any event, make sure that you also have the proof of work experience. Very, very common reasons. The other thing too is compare your dates in the police certificate to the dates in your address history, right? So what we want to know here in the address history is, right? So if the police certificate says, Cedric was in the Philippines for 1 year from January 1st to December 31st, but in reality, my address history, it shows that I was there for 3 years. Well, that's clearly going to be incomplete and it's going to get sent back because your police certificate is not going to have the correct dates that you disclose in your address history. So very common reasons, right? So proof of work experience, number 1, correct knock, lead statements, supporting documents. Number 2, police certificates. Make sure you have the correct police certificates. Something that Alicia mentioned in her answer here about the most common mistakes for express entry, but which Alicia mentioned too, is when it comes to the educational credentials, right? Make sure that, so just down here, make sure that the educational credentials is approved by the organization and you've obtained the proper document for proof of studies. So for WES, as an example, World Educational Services, right? You have to have the mention that it's for IRCC, right? There's a few other requirements here, but generally speaking, get your ECA, attach your post-secondary certificates, attach your transcripts, and you're good to go. But review your application, review the completeness check. And it's obviously something we have a lot of clients that we assist with express entry. And it's something we'd love to help you with is reviewing your supporting documents and making sure you have a good application to avoid refusals and to avoid further delays in processing your application. So those of you who received an ITA, congratulations. I see some of the comments right now. Fantastic stuff. Very happy that you guys have received your ITAs. Congratulations. Second thing I want to talk about, so we have the score of 500. Finally at 500, but we do want it to get lower. And then the second thing we have here is an announcement for reuniting families across the country. So essentially, long story short, when you become a permanent resident inside Canada, you might be wondering, well, how can I get my parents? How can I get my siblings inside Canada, right? And it's something that Canada has had various iterations over the last few years to do with reuniting families across the countries, and in specific with parents. So they recently announced a lot of changes to what's called a super visa. Super visa allows your parents to enter Canada and stay for up to 2 years, right? A multiple entry 10-year visa allowed to stay for up to 2 years. They have to get their own health insurance, a few other requirements, but generally speaking, it allows your parents to come inside Canada and visit you and spend time with you and your family, especially if you have kids, right? But if you want your parents to stay inside Canada to obtain family reunification, for them to obtain their PR, well, this is what the government of Canada announced 2 days ago. And this has to do with parents. So what happened is in 2020, you were able to submit a interest to sponsor your parents. And then what they've done is in 2021, they took from the same pool. And now again in 2022, they're taking as well from the same pool. So they announced that they're going to send out 23,000 invitations. And they're going to be accepting, 15,000. So they expect, right, to have about 8,000 that are going to be incomplete or not well done. So very interesting. So fantastic news. If you're a PR inside Canada and you applied in 2020 not applied, but had an interest to sponsor your parents, this is fantastic. If you're already a PR and you did not do this, the program always changes, but we're going to definitely keep you posted on the next time that you can have your interest to sponsor. But, this is very small, right? We're at 15,000 applications, and Canada is taking about 400,000 permanent residents a year. Not everyone's going to be wanting to sponsor their parents, right? For example, their parents might already be established, or, of the 400,000, there's obviously children whose parents are already inside Canada, right? But all to say that Canada, right, we're taking 15,000 applicants for parents. There's 400,000 a year that become permanent residents. So it's a small number, but it's welcomed use. All right, so that's number 2. Number 3, let's talk about streamlining immigration medical examinations, something that some of you have spoken about in my last live Q&A. And I actually couldn't answer the question the last time. I said, listen, there's temporary policies. They're most likely going to expire because of COVID. I don't feel comfortable answering the question because we don't know what's going to be happening. And funny enough, yesterday, received some news from IRCC that they're going to continue to exempt individuals from permanent residence in some circumstances. So it's not for everybody, right? It's not for work permits. It's not going to be for people who want to work in healthcare, but this exemption applies to foreign nationals in specific cases. And essentially, you've already completed a medical examination in the last 5 years, right? And other conditions. Nevertheless, welcomed news. It takes time out of your day, right? Take time off from work, see a doctor, pay for fees and whatnot. This is very, very welcomed news for a lot of individuals. And this is going to keep going until 2024. So take a look at this policy. It's welcomed news, right? It means less work for you, but again, only applies for some individuals. So read this very carefully. So, lots of things happening in immigration law. And something we've talked about all summer is that, the next few months are going to be super, super busy with parliaments back, which means new laws, which means new changes. And we know that a lot of changes are coming to Express Entry, right? Occupation specific, location specific, and so on. In any event, we're welcoming this news. We're still waiting for, more news on transitioning from temporary status to permanent status. They're going to be launching. They've talked about studying a municipal PNP program. So municipalities are going to be able to have nominees, right? We're also going to see some program extended. We're going to see how studying in Canada is going to be diversified from source countries. So they're trying to get more different countries to apply for study permits. We're going to see also encouraging people to not necessarily just get your PR and go straight to a big city, but trying to find ways to have individuals immigrate to Canada in rural and northern context, right? So lots of changes coming. So you do want to keep informed. You do want to keep yourself posted because it could very well lead to you getting permanent residence sooner or give you a better opportunity to immigrate to Canada. So the last thing I want to talk about, it is Thursdays. Thursdays, I do try to do part of this in French, and I did write a blog to immigrate to Canada. So I wrote it in French, and I wrote a blog here to immigrate to Canada if you're a francophone. Donc, si vous parlez français et vous voulez immigrer au Canada, je vous encourage de lire mon blog sur comment obtenir un permis de travail et ensuite comment obtenir la résidence permanente. Donc, c'est vraiment un programme qui vise aux immigrants qui veulent immigrer au Canada, les immigrants francophones qui veulent immigrer à l'extérieur du Québec. Donc, c'est pour encourager les francophones dans les communautés francophones en situation minoritaire situées à l'extérieur du Québec. Donc, essentiellement, vous pouvez obtenir un permis de travail dispensé d'une étude d'impact sur le marché du travail. Donc, pour les employeurs, c'est plus facile pour les employeurs de vous engager. De plus, lorsque vous voulez formuler une demande pour la résidence permanente, sous le programme d'entrée express, vous allez recevoir 50 points de plus, peut obtenir jusqu'à 50 points supplémentaires en fonction de votre niveau de français pour immigrer au Canada. Donc, ça rend l'immigration pour rentrer au Canada, obtenir un permis de travail, obtenir l'expérience pour ensuite obtenir des points supplémentaires pour votre expérience de travail canadien et ensuite des points supplémentaires pour votre niveau de langue en français et ensuite obtenir la résidence permanente. Donc, j'ai ici écrit une stratégie pour obtenir la résidence permanente en tant qu'immigrant francophone au Canada pour ceux et celles qui veulent immigrer à l'extérieur du Québec. So, very briefly in English, right? I wrote a blog on French immigrating to Canada as a francophone. You are able to get a work permit, right? Without a labor market impact assessment, which is really makes it much easier for employers to hire you and to come to Canada to start working. Once you start working, you're going to get more points for Canadian work experience, right? More points for Canadian work experience. And you will then, there we go, so more points for Canadian work experience, and then you're also going to get additional points for your French. So if, and really the requirement is that you've lived your like day-to-day life is in French, right? And if there's any uncertainty, they're going to ask you for a language test at level 7 or higher. So if you studied in French, coming from a francophone country, and you speak good French, you're going to try to demonstrate this in your work permit application. And then for express entry, you do have to do your test for express entry anyways to get those additional points. But it's really great if you're a Francophone, if you speak French and you want to come work to Canada, definitely something to explore. And just before we move on here, I just want to note here that it's really important that if you're visa required in your country, you still have to obtain a visa to come to Canada, right? So some individuals are going to be able to make this application. Well, they recommend you make the work permit application outside of Canada, but some individuals are allowed to make it at the border, and it's going to be those who are visa exempt. But generally speaking, if you're a business and you want to hire individuals without a labor market impact assessment because you can't find anyone for your business, well, actually, you don't even have to prove this, right? All you have to prove is that this individual speaks French, they're going to immigrate outside of Quebec. There's a few other requirements, but generally speaking, the requirements are much, much lower and much, much easier to get French individuals to immigrate to Canada outside of Quebec. So if you're an employer, reach out. This is a fantastic program. You can get a work permit for 4 or 5 years. Either the person speaks French, either they don't, either they're going to work outside of Quebec, either they won't, right? So it's kind of a much more certainty in terms of what you're getting involved in, especially if you're hiring someone that's visa exempt, right, who doesn't need a visa. It's going to make it even easier for them to come to Canada and start working, and it does lead to permanent residence inside Canada. So it's a fantastic program for individuals and employers. All right, 15 minutes of updates. A lot is happening in immigration law, and now we have at least 15 minutes of questions. So let's get right to it. I love to know where you're joining me from. I'm always going to feature those questions. Ozan says, a wonderful morning again. Ozan, wonderful morning to you. Thank you for joining me. We have Mark who says, good evening from the Philippines. Good evening, Mark. So it's 6:47 a.m. in Toronto, but for a lot of those who are outside of Canada, I'm outside of Canada as well. I'm currently teleworking, which means that if you're outside Canada and you want to speak to someone at a more convenient time, I'm available. And the same thing for individuals inside Canada, I'm going to be available inside the morning to speak with you. So do let me know where you are joining me from. And again, I don't necessarily take the questions in order. I try to take the questions that apply to the most people. We have Victor here, says from Brazil. Welcome, Brazil, beautiful, beautiful country. All right, let's get right to it. Again, we don't necessarily take it in order, but let's talk about the most common immigration questions that I can help you with. So let's take a look here. So Kira says, hello, sir. Got my ETA yesterday. Well, congrats, Kira. That's fantastic, fantastic news. My bank refuses to issue a letter in the format required by IRCC. What can I provide as an alternative? They can provide stamped bank statements, but not much else. So excellent question. So if we head on over here to the completeness check, right? So if you're a federal skilled worker through express entry, you do have to have the proof of funds. And Kira, if you're going to have children or get married, do keep in mind that the federal skilled worker program, it is taking quite a bit of time here to receive a decision. So sorry, I'll get to my point in just a moment, but we've already talked about this quite a bit. But right now for federal skilled workers, processing time is 26 months. We've had success with much shorter waiting times, and Mark and Alicia will talk about this later today. So make sure to check out their live Q&A, but it's currently taking 26 months. So if you have any changes in the proof of funds and your family composition, right, all the way until you get accepted for PR, you need to meet the proof of funds. And this means that the settlement fund requirement is going to continue to increase in family compositions even after you apply because it's an eligibility requirement. All to say, first thing you need to know is keep in mind that if your family composition is going to change even after you apply, but before you get PR, the proof of funds is going to change, and there's a good chance that in 26 months this might happen for a lot of us. All right, so let's get right to it. The caveat in mind, and let's go here to settlement funds. And so, let's just put funds here. There we go. Proof of funds, they call it. And so here's the document requirement, right? So what we're going to see here at the very bottom is that what they want is the current balance of each account as well as the average for the past 6 months. And the way you're going to be able to demonstrate this, Kira, is going to be exactly this, to provide bank statements to show how much money you have. But keep in mind that here they're talking about all current bank accounts. So the applicant should provide, right, an official letter from one or more financial institution that lists all current bank accounts and investment accounts, as well as outstanding debts, credit card debts, and loans. If you have a car loan, right, they want to see it. If you have other debts like a mortgage, right, they also want to see this as well. But generally speaking, what they want is they want to see the outstanding debts and how much money you have. And here it talks about the letter, right? So I think here what would be very helpful for you is to talk about the efforts you made to obtain this letter. So in your letter of explanation, title proof of funds, and your explanation could be, listen, I went to my bank, I spoke to the manager, right? I asked them, I said, listen, this is the letter that I need. They refuse because XYZ, company policy, they can't do it, right? And then I tried asking a second time. They said no. So what I'm giving you are, right, my 6 bank statements from the past 6 months, which clearly shows that I meet the minimum proof of funds, right? So you could have more than one bank account. You could have multiple bank accounts, Canadian dollars, right, non-Canadian dollars, but you have to show that the money is liquid, right? You can actually move the money out of the bank account and you can use it inside Canada, because life in Canada, guess what? It's quite expensive. So they want to make sure they can come to Canada and settle properly. So Kira, to answer your question, in your letter of explanation, detail the efforts you made to obtain it. And then you can also provide your 6 months of stamped bank statements to show this. And again, you can have more than one bank account. This is a common issue that people face. Just do your best to obtain it, do your best to demonstrate you tried your best to obtain it, and then provide the 6 bank statements. And again, I don't know much about your situation. It's just general information about immigration. Obviously, love to speak to you more about that. All right, let's continue. Let's look for the next question. Again, we're looking for questions that apply to a lot of individuals to try to help out as many people as possible. So William has a great question, says, an international student currently on a post-graduation work permit and working since a year. Okay, so completed his studies inside Canada and obtained a work permit due to having studied inside Canada. A few other conditions, but generally speaking, it's available to a lot of students. Question, can I use the points for job offer points for CRS points considering I am working for a year? So William, excellent question. In fact, we've received this question a lot, because there's a lot of confusion with CRS points and offer of employment. So we're actually going to go to our website here, and the reason why is Alicia wrote a fantastic blog that answers your question, Will. So let's take a look here. So Will says, Alicia here says that you can only claim points under some circumstances, right? So let's go take a look here. So who can claim points for for qualifying offer of arranged employment, right? So here we're talking about the very basics. So your employer cannot be an embassy, cannot be on the list of ineligible employers. Great. Continuous, full-time, skilled not, great. And then the employer writes a new arranged employment offer whereby they specify they intend to continue to hire you, right? So these are the general requirements for any scenario. But let's look at the 3 different scenarios where you can claim these points, Will. So here we have scenario 1. The qualifying offer of employment is made by a Canadian employer who's obtained a new positive LMIA. So in your case, you don't have an LMIA, right? You're on a postgraduate work permit and you're working your job. So no LMIA mentioned in your question, and so you don't fit scenario 1. Scenario 2, you've already obtained an LMIA. So right now your work permit is an LMIA-based employer-specific closed work permit. Again, not your scenario, you're on a postgraduate work permit. But if you've already had an LMIA issue and you're working with an LMIA work permit, right, there are some conditions, and this is where you might be confusing yourself, Will, but this last condition, right, they give you a letter of employment confirming the employed you for at least 1 year. But right now you're in a postgraduate work permit. You're not on an LMIA employer-specific work permit, right? Your employer is not named on your work permit, and as such, you don't meet this requirement. So no scenario 1, no scenario 2. Scenario 3, let's take a look. You're working in Canada on an LMIA exempt, but employer-specific work permit under the International Mobility Program. So this again is not your case. You do not have an employer-specific work permit. You have an open work permit. So William, to answer your question, no, based on the information you gave me, you don't meet any of these scenarios. Again, very fantastic, well done job by Alicia. Take a look at our website for the blog. There's obviously IRCC has also their own explanation. Inside the ministerial instructions, you'll find a little bit more legalese for what's qualifying. If we just scroll down here, what's qualifying offer of qualifying arranged employment. Let's try to find it. Yeah, there we go. So they call it qualifying offer of arranged employment. And again, so this is essentially, Alicia has removed all this legalese, right? All this complicated legal stuff and summarized it essentially for you. Again, just general information, Will, but listen, you don't meet any of the scenarios. Very common question we have. So in your express entry application, the job offer question, you're going to say no because you do not have a qualifying offer of employment. All right, really, really good questions. Thank you, Will, for this question. Again, we're not necessarily taking in order. We're trying to take the most common questions that are going to be applying to the most individuals right now. All right, let's go find our next question. Again, please let me know where you're joining me from. Please let me know your question. Again, we're trying to find questions that can help everyone. All right, communication first. Good question about spousal sponsorships, right? So let's go take a look at what is going on here. So as some of you may know, when you want to come to Canada, if you have a PR citizenship inside Canada, you might be able to sponsor your spouse, right? So let's go take a look at these requirements. So the first thing to know about sponsorships is there's two different types. You can do outside Canada or inside Canada, right? So if your spouse is living inside Canada, you can sponsor them inside Canada and get a work permit and then obtain your PR, right? So the spouse has to be living inside Canada and has to have a status inside Canada. So when we talk about a status inside Canada, they could have a work permit, right? They could have a study permit. They could also have a visitor visa. So as you know, or as you probably should know, if you're inside Canada, right? If a border officer just stamps your passport, or if they let you into Canada without nothing else, your stay is authorized for 6 months. Right? So after 6 months, you must leave Canada at the end of your stay. However, you are able to apply for a visitor record. A visitor record essentially allows you to stay inside Canada to extend your stay inside Canada. Now, what you need to know for a visitor record, and we'll get right to it, is that you need to make the application when your status inside Canada is valid. So you cannot make a visitor record application most scenarios once your stay inside Canada has expired. So if we check here on the website, it's going to say to make the application before your status expires, right? So if you want to extend your status as a visitor, this is what you would do. Or if you have a study permit, you want to go to a visitor record, that's allowed again. And again, very important to apply before it expires. They say 30 days here, but in reality, because of delays, mostly caused by COVID, a visitor record takes like 6 or 7 months right now. So let's go take a look inside Canada. Visitor, we want visitor record. They have the processing times. Temporary, okay. Visitor visa, there we go. Missed it. Let's get to it. All right, so you can see right now the current processing time is 200 days. It's gonna take a long time before you get a decision. And it's explained more on their website, but with the visitor record, you are allowed to stay inside Canada. Man, too many tabs open. With the visitor record, you're allowed to stay in Canada until the decision is made on the visitor record. Don't leave Canada, right? It talks about leaving and returning Canada. Make sure to take a look at this. But a visitor record is to stay longer inside Canada. It's not to come back to Canada, right? Oh, there we go. The processing time was there the whole time. Well, there we go. So take a look at these requirements. But if you come from a country with a high rate of visa refusals, come from a country where historically individuals have a hard time at demonstrating they're going to go back to their country of origin, this could be factors that they're going to consider, right? For example, they give you a visa and you said that you have a temporary intent to come to Canada, and now you're essentially extending this intent, right? How can you demonstrate that at the end of your visitor record, you're in fact going to leave Canada, right? And especially in your case with filing the spousal application, which is a permanent resident application, right? So it gets a little bit tricky, but listen, to answer your question, a visitor record is an application to extend your stay inside Canada. Do it before it expires. Don't leave Canada, and try to justify how you're going to leave Canada at the end of your visitor record, right? Because you still have that temporary intent with the visitor record. But take a look at this. Obviously, we would do spousal applications. More than happy to help you out. All right, let's go find our next question here. Again, we're trying to find general questions that don't apply to everyone. Let's go find a question here. Katamba Ismail says, hello, well done. Mine is international student on the extension of hours to work. And international students now work full-time, or how many hours now? So Katamba, great question. So right now, the announcement that we have is we're waiting for the specific details to be released. But what we know is that it's actually going to take effect on November 15th. So no, so to answer your question, it's not full-time right now. We're still waiting for IRCC to release the information on the 20 hours work limit for students. And again, it's only going to apply to individuals who are already allowed to work with their study permit, right? So you might have other conditions on your work permit that says inside or outside Canada. You might have other restrictions that don't allow you to work, right? So it's only for individuals that are respecting the conditions of their study permit, so full-time at the DLI studying, right? And on their study permit, before it said they were allowed to work 20 hours in XYZ. Now the 20-hour limit is going to be removed, so they can work full-time, right? But again, there's a few caveats. Just because you have a study permit doesn't mean you can work, you can stop studying, work full-time, do it, work for a hospital, right? That's not what's going on. It's just very, very specific, right, to removing the 20-hour limit for those of you who have it on their work permits, right? So very, very important to keep in mind. So I think it's November 15th. I'm just trying to confirm it here. Pretty sure it's November 15th. Yeah, it is November 15th until the end of 2023. So it's not right now. It's only those that have the condition on their study permits. All right, I hope that was helpful. Let's go find our next question here. Richmond says, please, how long does it take to get a response from a student visa from Italy? So listen, it really depends on the visa office. They don't actually publish on processing times. So they don't distinguish between Italy or different countries on the processing time calculator. But what we do know is the minister is continuing to have resources to do the processing. But right now, guys, it's really your last chance to apply for a study permit because the January term is starting, right? And so right now it's one of the final times to do so. There's also the direct learning stream. We can get here too. Let's try to find an IRCC. Yeah, student direct streams. The student direct stream is also available for some countries. The processing time is only 20 days. Let's go take a look here if Italy is on this list. So Italy is not on the list of the direct student stream. So right now we don't know how long it's going to take. They're saying average of 13 weeks, right, across the different embassies, but hopefully it's quicker than expected. But really right now, if you want to come to Canada to study in January, it's like right now is the last chance. Like you'll have to submit it right now or else we're talking about the August enrollment. So Mark has an excellent question regarding the requirements for a post-graduation work permit, right? So let's go take a look here, Mark, at the requirements. So as a lot of you know, when you come to Canada to study, at the end, when you complete your study program, you can then obtain a work permit, and it's an open work permit. And the idea with the open work permit is that you're going to get Canadian work experience to then qualify for express entry and get your permanent residence. So generally speaking, Mark, the type and duration of program will have an impact, right? Will have an impact, right? So it needs to be at a designated learning institute, right? And the duration of your studies is going to determine the duration of your postgrad work permit. So let's go take a look here. So about validity and application. So generally speaking, if you apply for your postgrad work permit can be between 8 months and 3 years. And to determine the length, the officers are going to look at, okay, if it's 1 year, if it's more than 1 year but less than 2 years, you're going to get the length of the work permit should coincide with the length of the program. So 1 year studies, 1 year work permit. And then we talk about 2 years. So 2 years or longer, you can get the permit should be for 3 years. So the length of the program, yes, will have an impact. Number two, it has to be at a designated learning institute, right? So it can't be at any school in Canada. It has to be a designated learning institute. Generally speaking, a lot of schools in Canada, a lot of universities and colleges will meet the designated learning institute requirement. All right, so those are the two general caveats. There are other requirements that you should take a look at, right? So distance learning, right? In some cases, it's, you have to do it in person. Your program has to be full-time as well. Few other caveats, but generally speaking, right, to increase your chances of getting a post-graduation, it's getting a long PGWP, right? And then getting a permanent residence, you're probably going to want to do a program of studies of at least 2 years, right? Because a 1-year work permit is going to be quite tough to qualify for Express Entry, which is just 1 year of Canadian work experience. You're also going to find yourself in a scenario where if you don't have an avenue for another work permit, you're going to have to leave Canada at the end of your stay. So generally speaking, if this is your intention mark, you're going to be looking at a 2-year or more study program at a DLI that's full-time, located inside Canada. You're going to apply to come to Canada, study in person, and complete it full-time. Then, when you receive the completion of your studies, so you get like a notification and whatnot, then you can apply for your post-graduation work permit. And if your program of study was 2 years or more, you're going to get a 3-year open work permit. And then, here we're continuing the process here. And then you're going to want to make sure that the job you have meets the eligibility for Express Entry, right? So the Canadian Experience class, you're coming to Canada to study. Let's take a look here. We talk about your minimum requirements. For education, you have to have 1 year of skilled work experience. So not any work experience, it has to be skilled. Here they're talking about, so in a position that's NOC, OA, or B, and as a lot of you may know, this is going to be changing in November. Go to resources blog, scroll down. Actually, it might be quite far now, so we're just going to go ahead and use our search bar, and we're going to type TEER, which is going to be the new program for the NOC requirements. And so let's take a look here at the NOC. This is the blog that I wrote. And essentially, there's going to be some changes with the NOC codes to different tier systems and changes in eligible occupations. So make sure to review this. But Mark, generally speaking, as I mentioned, 2-year plus work program, get your postgrad work permit, work in a skilled position full-time, then accumulate enough points for eligibility to apply, but also to meet the CRS, right? To get your points for Canadian work experience and then get your PR. So a lot of people do this. It's a valid option to immigrate to Canada. In fact, they're studying in Canada how to obtain permanent residence. Sorry, I got distracted looking at the questions here. Communication first. Following up on the spousal question I asked, is it okay for a person to stay in Canada after visitor record expire while they wait for a spousal PR to be processed? You need a status inside Canada for the spousal application, right? You can't remain in Canada without a status. And so this is a tricky question, but as we talked about, get your visitor record, right, to stay inside Canada, to legally be allowed to continue staying inside Canada. All right, let's go find the next question. Again, we're trying to find the most helpful questions here that apply to most people. So Anat has a great question about the expiry of documents. So Anat got his ITA yesterday. Congratulations, Anat. Spouse's language scores are going to expire November 20th. So if I submit everything in the month of October only, do I need to worry? I don't need to worry. Am I correct? So, your application locks in. So at the time that you apply, it's going to lock in, and you do need to apply before. If you're claiming points for ALT, right? You do need to make sure that you do apply before it expires, because then it's going to lock in. Now, keep in mind the immigration officers do have discretion. They could ask her to take another language test, or they could ask for more documents and whatnot. But generally speaking, correct. If it's going to be once you apply, it's going to lock in, and that's the score that they're going to be considering to see whether or not you met the ITA. So there we have it. Make sure you apply in October. Ganesh. This question does come up once in a while, right? So the whole question about when can you claim points for a sibling that has obtained their permanent residence, right? So let's go take a look at what we're talking about for those of you who are not aware. If you have a family member that's in Canada, so again, family members for immigration purposes, it's defined differently. So in this case here, when they're talking about proof of relationship to a relative, sorry, not family, but relative, right? So here we're talking about how can you obtain points for this? So this completeness check. So this is what you have to provide. Here it talks about a copy of both sides of the family member's Canadian citizenship document, Canadian birth certificate, and or permanent resident card must be provided, right? Must reside inside Canada. So providing different documents, providing a proof of relationship and whatnot. To answer your question, Ganesh, it's going to do with, so it's interesting because this is what they wanted the completeness check. Now you don't have the permanent residence card, right? They might also not have these addresses if they don't have a lease and whatnot. But let's go take a look here at the eligibility. Is it the eligibility that I'm looking for? Let's take a look. I don't think it's mentioned in the eligibility. Yeah, it's not mentioned in the eligibility, but the question it asks you specifically about it's the ministerial instructions I'm looking for. So let's go take a look at the ministerial instructions, which is how you get points. And long story short is that when they enter Canada, and so right now they receive their confirmation of permanent residence, they don't have PR yet, right? They don't have PR. They need to come into Canada. It has to be signed by the officer. And at that point, when they enter Canada, when their confirmation of permanent residence is signed, at that point, they obtain their permanent residence. The PR card is to demonstrate when you travel outside Canada, it's to demonstrate that you have your PR. But, right, it is not, when you get the PR card, it's not when you get your PR. When you get your confirmation of permanent residence, it's also not when you get your PR. It's going to be the moment that the confirmation of permanent residence is signed at the border, that the person is admitted into Canada as a permanent resident. At that point, your sibling is going to become a PR. So right now, if they just have the confirmation of permanent residence, no, they do not have permanent residence, right? If they've landed inside Canada, they got their confirmation of permanent residence signed, they came inside Canada, they're residing inside Canada, and right now, they continue to reside inside Canada, right? It's not going to be a soft landing, but they continue to reside inside Canada. They're waiting for the PR card. Well, in that case, yes, you're able to claim points. But as we saw, actually, let's go take a look here. Let's say relative. So let's go take a look here at the points. And again, the points are based on a relative who is a permanent resident and residing inside Canada. So if your relative is doing a soft landing, right, is going to be coming inside. No, this is not the points. Where is it? There we go, points for sibling inside Canada. So 15 points may be accorded to, right? Accompany their spouse, permanent residence for the purposes of Section 1. So who is considered a relative, right? So only some individuals. So in this case, your sibling, your blood relative, right? Would be able, if they're residing inside Canada and they have the permanent residence, you are able to claim points for it. As it relates to the completeness check, right? Explain your situation, letter of explanation, provide the signed confirmation of permanent residence, provide as many details as you can, but really you get the points when they become permanent resident, not when they get the confirmation of permanent residency, not when they obtain their PR card, as I mentioned, when they enter Canada and sign it. Mark says, thanks for that, Cedric. Listen, Mark, my pleasure. Thank you for joining me. And that says, thanks a lot, Cedric. So how much time does it take to get an AOR PDF after paying the fees? So after you pay the fees, so you're going to get that generic response usually within 24 hours that you submitted an application for PR. But depending, like for example, for the Bridging Open Work Permit or different programs, what they sometimes want is actually a letter that your application is complete. And right, so in other words, by the time it gets to an officer, it's reviewed as complete. Then they send another letter to you letting you know that it's complete. So it really, really depends. Mark and Alicia, in a few hours, you're going to speak about their success that took place in that happened pretty quickly for a PR card. But generally speaking, as we saw, the official times for Canadian Experience class are well over 12, 13, 14 months. And for federal skilled workers, it's 26 months. So somewhere in between, maybe 6 months to a year, you can get that second letter that your application is complete. So it really depends, but you'll get that generic letter you submit an application for PR, right, quite quickly. All right, let's continue to find some questions here. Again, congratulations to those who received an ITA. In ITA, we have a funny question here. Rajan says, just tell me your honest view. Well, listen, I'm always being honest. And, you know, it's always tough to speak about what's practically happening and managing expectations, right? The federal skilled worker program can say 26 months, but people are getting their PR much quicker, right? Sometimes it's a little bit difficult as well, right? Because we're not the ones taking the decisions, right? It's IRCC, but sometimes it's difficult to predict what someone is going to do, right? So we talk about risk and probabilities and whatnot, but let's take a look here. Rajan says, please tell me your honest view. All right, Rajan, I'm honest. 478 CRS FSW physician co. Do you think people like me might get targeted in targeted draws? Yeah, you might get targeted. Absolutely, physicians. There's a good chance, but keep in mind, to be a physician inside Canada, you're going to have to obtain a certification from a province regarding your physician skills, right? So you might face challenges finding employment and working inside Canada if your occupation as a physician requires you to get approval from a medical board that you can practice as a doctor, right? So just because you're a physician in your country doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to come to Canada and practice as a physician, right? Obviously, it's possible and a lot of people do it, but make sure you take a look to make sure that you're able to do so inside Canada. Each province has their own board that provides accreditation for physicians with foreign training. And again, you're going to see that recently, and something that I wrote a blog about on our website, resources blog, they have made some changes for physicians, so easier access to doctors for permanent residents. So they've changed the way that they look at, in some cases, they look at the fee-for-service model, being employed or self-employed. So they are aware of this, that Canada needs doctors. But again, right, one of the challenges that you're going to face is obtaining your accreditation to practice inside Canada. It's going to be very important to do that. All right, Yash, let's see here if I can help you. Can I apply for the work permit 18-month extension outside Canada? If yes, do I need to apply for restoration? Also, can I fly back to Canada and work? I have a visitor visa and also interim authorization email. So Yash, let's take a look at your question. So for you, those of you who might know, there's been, due to COVID, the minister provided an 18-month extension for postgraduate workers if your permit expired in a certain window. And so let's go take here at the list. And like, again, I might not mention this, but the PGWP, the post-graduation work permits, is a one-time permit. It's been the case for this forever. So this is very extraordinary that the minister is actually extending these, right? It was unexpected, but it makes sense due to everything that happened with COVID. So let's take a look here. So this is what you're referring to, which is the 18-month extension. So let's take a look at your case here. So can I apply for the 18-month extension outside Canada? The question is yes. The answer is yes. It's confirmed here. So we can actually go, where can I find it? So there we go. So if you have a temporary valid residency visa, but you're currently outside Canada, it's possible to come back to Canada and be authorized to work. However, the interim work authorization email, notice, can't by itself be used to return to Canada. So this answers your question, right? Most of your questions. So you are able to apply from outside Canada. There's no problem. But no, you cannot fly back and work inside Canada if you have a visa and the interim work authorization, right? So not allowed. To answer your question about whether you need to apply for restoration, this is going to depend really on your case here. So let's go here and click apply online. And here it's going to help us determine your specific situation, how to apply. So where are you applying from? In your case, outside Canada. The second question it's going to ask you, it doesn't ask us a second question, but here it talks about how to apply. So you are able to do it to apply from outside Canada. And again, it depends on when your work permit expired, right? So if it expired before, you're not eligible. On or after, you're allowed to apply. And then in your specific case, you're asking about the restoration, right? So restoration right now for your work permit, if you were inside Canada, for sure, you'd have to apply for the restoration if your work permit's expired. However, you're outside Canada and you do not need to restore your status because you're outside Canada, right? So you're making an application for a new work permit from outside Canada. You're not going to be restoring it. But listen, read these instructions super, super carefully, right? There's stuff here to do with fees, right? They want you to say you're exempt. They want you to go and, right, pay your fees before, upload it, right? They also want you in your forms to put in here the open work permit, right? They want you to specifically answer your forms in a specific manner. So listen, read this guide extremely careful because this public policy has some very specific things that you need to do to make sure that you answer these questions correctly. So there we go. We'll leave it at that. But listen, to answer your question, very briefly, no, you cannot fly back to Canada and start working with the interim authorization email. You need to apply from outside Canada, and this guide is going to give you more details. And then the restoration, if you're inside Canada, you'd have to apply for the restoration, but outside Canada, you're going to be applying for a new work permit under this policy. Again, read it super, super carefully. Sema, this is a question we receive a lot, right? Your employer, you can't reach them, they closed, they don't want to provide you with a proof of work experience, right? So it's really important. First thing you're going to do, Sema, is have a letter of explanation and explain the efforts you've done. What efforts have you done to obtain this? Who have you contacted? Who have you tried to reach? Who are you trying to contact to obtain this letter? Did you speak to your old boss, your CEO, your colleagues, right? Why can't you obtain it? Provide this explanation inside of the letter of explanation. Number 2, what else do you have, right? So do you have pay stubs? Do you have a job offer letter? Do you have a confirmation of service? Do you have a statement that says, yeah, you work there, right? So what other experience, what other documents can you provide? But again, in your letter of explanation, explain upfront why you can't get these documents, acknowledge that there's a deficiency in your documents, and then explain what you've done your best to prove this work experience. Lastly, my question for you, Samuel, would be, do you really need to claim this work experience, right? For example, do you have enough points strictly on your Canadian work experience, on other work experience, where you don't have to take this risk of not providing the proper documents to IRCC, right? So some cases, for example, individuals are going to have family work experiences or self-employed experiences that they can't prove they worked full-time, right? They don't have any pay stubs to show this position was actually paid, right? Or they're able to prove it, but the paper they have shows it was 5 hours a week, but in reality, they did all this preparation, unpaid, all this preparation that wasn't paid. They think it's 20 hours, right? So I said, my question for you is, can you avoid it? Can you provide, can you rely on other work experiences, other jobs to obtain, to obtain your permanent residency? If you have to rely on it, right? Well, listen, I've already talked to you about what you need to do, but do consider whether or not you fully need to claim this this work experience. All right, guys. Well, listen, this is gonna conclude our live Q&A. Gwyneth saying, so we had the question about the spousal sponsorship. So already in Canada, she got her confirmation of permanent residence from a spousal PR application. So already in Canada, if it's signed, right, provide the explanation of what happened, provide the signed document. But again, it's what they want is the PR card. So do you really need to apply right now? Can you wait? Can you explain what is happening? Do you have the proper documents? But as we saw, right, the moment you get your points is going to be when she obtains her permanent residence. We have Job greeting us from Ecuador. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for having me and listening to me. Let's take a look here at our very last question that we're going to take. Listen, a lot of very specific questions. Listen, a lot of questions on processing times and whatnot. Listen, guys, it's really hard to say a lot of times when things are going to happen. It's very dependent on your visa office. It's very dependent sometimes just on luck, on the pure luck of you getting fast processing, on more visa officers joining the embassy, processing files. It's going to have to do with the program you're applying to, your nationality. But generally speaking, the times on the IRCC website are going to be the general times, right? The expected times. Sometimes it's quicker. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer on your situation. So for those of you joining us today, thank you so much. As a brief reminder, my name is Cedric Marin. I'm an immigration lawyer at Holt Immigration Law. We have links in the comments below. If you want to speak to us, go ahead here and speak with a lawyer. If you want to learn more about us, here on the About Us on our team, you can have here all our lawyers, and specifically me. I used to work for the Government of Canada. I've worked for the United Nations. I worked for the Federal Court. So a lot of experience in Canadian immigration in the world. I telework abroad. So if you're abroad and want to speak with an immigration lawyer, please contact me. My pleasure to speak with you about how to immigrate to Canada. Évidemment, je parle aussi français, donc si vous avez des questions en français, ça serait mon plaisir. Now, we do have this whole new page here that we've worked really hard to develop. We're super proud about this. It's called Immigrate, and here we have tons of information. So this has been written by lawyers. So we've written this, we've reviewed this, we've developed this content based on our experience of what we think is important to talk about. What do people want to know when they apply for the Canadian Experience class? Take a look at our website. It does talk about the process, and this is very detailed. So we try to be as detailed as possible to help you make your own immigration applications, right? We also have courses that we offer at the Canadian Immigration Institute. And here we have express entry courses, we have spousal sponsorship courses. This allows you to learn about how to immigrate to Canada and prepare your own immigration application. So take a look at the links below to see what is going on, what we're offering. Again, thank you so much for joining me. We have a lot of resources. The whole Immigrate tab is fantastic. It's new. We also have resource blogs, always pumping out content. We have a newsletter as well. We're really excited to help individuals immigrate to Canada. So please take a look at our website. And again, I do my podcast 6:30 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so 6:30 Toronto time. So yeah, if you want to join me again, I'd love to speak with you. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful week, wonderful weekend. Enjoy the changing colors in Canada. It's so pretty right now with all the different colors. And thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.